Hello viewers and welcome to my blog then for the German Grand Prix 2012. Another interesting couple of days build up. Of course we had mixed weather conditions taking the rain from the UK to Germany, which was a battle for the drivers. It was good to see the drivers completing the qualifying sessions within the time frame and in the wet conditions. I think it brings a whole host of challenges for the drivers. I think it's important that they're pushed to the limit sometimes, but I think what's been an interesting thing throughout the practice sessions was the use of the runoff areas of Hockenheim and how the circuit has changed from a very risky circuit to one now where there is almost no risk of many of the corners running off. And we're seeing a lot of people using the runoff areas, which is quite interesting in practice. But what the main issue that came up before the race today, of course, was the engine mapping on the Red Bulls. And I think this is an argument that's going to go on. There are benefits to how the warm air and when the warm air is blown. As to the ins and outs of how that works, I have no idea. Suffice to say that it looked a bit dodgy to the FIA and they referred it to the stewards, and though the stewards weren't necessarily happy with the explanation that Red Bull gave, they certainly weren't able to do anything about it because basically the wording of it was a bit ambiguous. So that's something that we're going to be looking at and definitely coming back to in the coming week, no doubt, when we're at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Now, the first thing that struck me about the German Grand Prix today was the amount of empty seats. It has to be said there were quite a few empty seats. What's happening in Germany at the moment? I'll ask German fans that are watching this video why there are so many empty seats. Is it the cost of the seats? Is it too high? Or because there are 5 German drivers in the championship? Or is it just where, perhaps Michael Schumacher is in relation? Or I don't know. I'd like to know, because there are 5 German drivers in it, and yet the turnout today seemed to be relatively low compared to the good old days when it used to always be crowded there. Hockenheim, a word about the circuit. I'd have to say I still prefer the old one. I know I've said this like a broken record so many times, but I do think it had a lot more character to it. So, onto the race then. Obviously, grid penalty for Mark Webber, which moved him down. In fact, he's one of 3 cars that had a grid penalty, which is a shame for those guys, because when you have something like a gearbox change or a malfunction on the car, it's not really the fault of the driver, but the teams should be able to work around that. So, unfortunately, it's something that they do need to find a workaround, and Ross Brawn mentioned that a joker would be handy to give people a one-off reprieve in case they do have technical failure, rather than simply building the cars too close to the requirements. So away from the start, it was good to see obviously Jensen back up there now. The new parts on the McLaren, they've reworked some of the bodywork here and there. Interesting to see how it's working, because the bodywork, they talk about the bodywork quite often and the airflow to the rear and everything else, but that's only part of the story. We never really know how these cars work. They're testing some new parts today on the Lotus as well. It's today over the weekend on the Lotus, and again it'll be some time before we know the success of all that. So Jensen obviously passed Maldonado, everybody's favourite driver at the moment. Though it's always nice to see someone get past him without incident. There was a couple of overtakes past him today where I thought, whoa, make it cleanly through. It has to be said, it's always competitive getting past him. A lot of debris in turn 1, Massa coming together. I think it was back of Kimi Räikkönen. We didn't actually notice. I didn't see the debris until they came around the end of the first lap. Should it have been a safety car? It's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, yes, there's debris there. Yes, it caused a couple of punches, but this is motor racing, and I think you're always going to get, sometimes the safety car can change the face of a race. It's really difficult to say. I think had the safety car been called out before we knew the debris was there, yes, there should have been a safety car. Once the whole field's gone on it and cleared it away, well, might as well crack on then, because basically if the punches are going to happen, they're going to happen. So obviously puncher for Lewis, he was one of those. Someone was going to get a problem and that ruined his race, basically. Going back to the pits, that's it guys, we should retire. McLaren didn't necessarily feel so at the time, but obviously there was some damage to the car from the tyre, probably flapping about and everything else, besides whatever bits went under the car. A shame for Lewis today, because he really needed some good points and it was a good opportunity for McLaren. Massa, so that was Massa's race kind of over really. Grosjean having problems, everything else. Michael Schumacher gradually moving down the order. Mercedes didn't really have the pace today. And of course then for Jensen really it was about getting past everybody and working his way up from 6th place, and that took really his first stint, was a lot of effort to get up into 3rd place, but he made some good passes at the hairpin there past Schumacher and Hulkenberg. And while Fernando Alonso was the first to pit today, and it was unusual actually. Normally he would pit a little bit later, but keeping control of the race, not wanting an undercut. While we see Kimi Räikkönen trying to find some free air for himself as well. The Lotus not qualifying as well as it should have, certainly affected by the conditions. So the front three were closing up. Then it was just a wait really after the first set of pit stops to see how they would all close up on each other. You know, we looked at it and thought, well, it's going to take some time for Jenson Button to close up on the back of them. And of course, during that time, he was using up a lot of fuel in closing that gap, as well as using up his tyres. Through the stops. And it has to be noted actually the interesting incident with lapping Lewis Hamilton. Alonso and Vettel, I say Vettel for the German viewers, Vettel were lapping Hamilton, and of course he unlapped himself past Sebastian Vettel, which is something we don't see very often. Do you know, it's not something I've seen for a very long time, and that's usually because the car lapping is usually an awful lot quicker. There is an occasion when it happened many years ago when Eddie Irvine unlapped himself against Ayrton Senna, and then Ayrton Senna got out the car and punched him in the head afterwards. That was quite entertaining at the time. Eddie Irvine was quite a cocky chap, so probably deserved it. And then after the stops, really, it was just about Vettel closing up on Button. Button's tyres had it. He'd used up a lot of the car early on in terms of his fuel and everything else, really pushed to get up to that sort of podium position. Kimi Räikkönen eventually got some free air but wasn't able to close the gap, and from there it was just a waiting game really to the end of the race. Were the front three going to have tyre problems? Were Alonso's tyres going to fall off? Alonso towards the end put in a very strong stint, and that was it for him. You knew he was gone. Jenson was falling back into the hands of Sebastian Vettel, and this is when it all kind of kicked off, wasn't it? Obviously, he went round the outside on the hairpin onto the runoff area and made an advantage by going on the runoff. Well, you're not allowed to do that. They've made that quite clear on the Friday. So, you know, he made a decision. If he had let Jenson back through, then re-overtaken Jenson, which would have been easy for him under the conditions of the tyres, he'd have been fine. But unfortunately, he didn't do that, went off, got second place, and has since been given a 20-second penalty, which has demoted him to fifth place. That promotes Jenson Button to second, Kimi Räikkönen to third. So, and I think it's Kobayashi is actually in fourth as well. So, or it might be Perez. Actually, it might be Perez. I just saw a Sauber there earlier. So, certainly a decision that they'll rue at Red Bull, really. They should have known better than that. I mean, it's obvious in the rules that that was going to happen. It was interesting in the commentary. We were hearing Ferrari speaking in English to Fernando and then Italian, so that everyone had to translate it. The idea on Sky was perhaps they should record some Cockney rhyming slang for Jenson Button when he's going around to confuse the rivals. If you have any Cockney rhyming slang quotes that you'd like to put in relation to this YouTube message, I'll be very keen to see them. Actually, that'd be very interesting indeed. But overall, win for Alonso. A controlling race victory for him today. Takes him 34 points in the lead now, ahead of Mark Webber. You have to say Ferrari are looking very, very strong. The whole package of the car, it just seems to work well at every circuit. And he's a relentless finisher. So unless he has technical problems or a couple of offs, it certainly looks like he's going to be strongly in line for the championship this year. As for everybody else, they're all still pretty close. But back-to-back victories, suddenly you're going to be up the top of the table. So there is a lot to play for at the moment. But what's been great about this year in F1 has been not just the unpredictability of the tyres, but how close we've seen Force India and Sauber and Williams all coming up there, getting very close to the top teams. And when you look at qualifying, suddenly you put on the soft tyre, you can be right up there. So it's really made qualifying a gamble as well for many of the teams. I'd say that if there's one team that's been a little bit disappointing and fallen off, it's Mercedes. They've not really shown the potential they perhaps the promise that they had earlier in the year. And the DRS system, the super DRS that everyone was going on about, hasn't really formed a huge advantage for them. They've had a tyre wear issue for the last few years, and again today they didn't really seem to have that speed, though Michael Schumacher was cutting through the field quite comfortably towards the end. It was a little bit too little too late. But that's it for the German Grand Prix 2012. Next week we have Hungary. Who knows, might be a different result there. It's a much smaller track, very twisty and turny. It depends which cars are going to suit that and what the weather's like as well. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.